Nice to see you all. Oh, of course, I forgot what I said. I wanted the subtext of this session to be how to not let your first year seminar drive you crazy. So, to that end, this is fairly structured, but it's also for you. It's, it's your session. So absolutely 100% interrupt, unmute yourselves, use the chat to say things and ask questions, and also kind of use both of those functions to help structure the way the session is going. Like, can we talk more about that? Or I would love a couple more examples, things like that. Or I would love to talk about an example from my class, right? Just as a way to make sure that we are really covering things that you find useful and meaningful. To start off, let's start with just a question. What is one thing that is making you happy right now? What is one thing that is making you happy right now?
Oh,
My daughter's having a really tough transition from Children's House to lower elementary, but once she gets there, she's having an amazing time, and it's an art camp and she's in her element right now. So even though the drop-off's hard, she's happy at school.
That's amazing. People feel, yeah, John, go ahead and feel free to use the chat if that's more your vibe.
no, I do not like chat, but I just right now at 12:30 finished the first of my summer session 2 classes at Bunker Hill, and it was great.
Great.
It's an 095-111 group, and typical of Bunker Hill, it is the students, they come from everywhere, and it's so interesting.
That's great. You seem energized. I love that.
I can't, they give me so much energy, and the way I teach the course, I just love doing it, and I see the students realize that this is not a blow off, and they have to think, and it's really hard.
That's huge, though. It's huge for them.
Yep.
Good job.
That's why I'm here.
So I make jewelry, and this week I sold 11 pairs of earrings to 4 different people, which, like, 11 pairs is the most I've ever sold in 1 week. So I'm just like, I like it.
Where do you sell them? Online or at a craft show?
I sell them on on various Facebook pages. Yeah, craft show is way too much work for me.
Okay.
That's amazing. Really good.
It's really cool.
Yeah, personal accomplishments, professional accomplishments, being happy to be in the process. Abby's makes me really happy because, like, getting a garden established, especially with native plants, takes so much patience. And so, like, when you actually see the fruition, I think it's really, it's buoying, and we need all the buoying we can get right now, right? So, yeah. Yay, in areas that are struggling. Yes, my email is really chock full of former students who are getting the axe in the arts and culture and heritage sector. So, Jim, I'm happy for your kiddos. Okay. And I love to hear that FYS feels less opaque and weird. So that's a good thing. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Look at, we're already one slide. We're already one slide it through.
Where'd you get that template? I like it.
Oh, you know what? At the very end, just remind me. I think it's called Presentation Go. Free templates, no login. So I'll make sure that I show you that at the very end. So here's the plan. We're gonna start with just a little bit of an informal conversation with Elizabeth about the results from the survey that she invited faculty who are teaching or have taught FYS to complete. So we talked about that a little bit in the one-day kickoff, but it seems like this is sort of just a good place to amplify some of the things around kind of what makes first year seminar challenging. Then we're going to go through some key issues. I think there are 5. Managing priorities, managing time, creating space in your syllabus, preventing and addressing common problems, and amplifying the good, right? And then we're going to make sure that there's some time just to kind of share some good ideas and reflection towards the end of the session. So the things that when Elizabeth shared some of the results, some of the initial results of the survey, these were some of the things that popped out at me. Logistics and exhaustion were the 2 big reasons why people stopped teaching first year seminar. So logistics is all over the place, right? It's that they're required in different areas. They're required to teach content courses. They're going up for tenure, and their first year seminar teaching evaluations weren't fabulous. The other thing that kind of came up in that category is that a lot of people find it kind of draining to teach first year seminar. And so that's something we really want to talk about today. The other thing is that most people, I mean, a good 50% think that it takes as much prep as other courses, but 25% of the people surveyed said that it took the same, like significantly more, somewhat or significantly more prep time. And then the final thing is you got to do this for yourself, because your department and your dean and your, the institution at large doesn't necessarily, from the perspective of faculty, really value this work. They don't really value or amplify the kinds of teaching practices, mentorship, advising, and ingenuity, creativity, innovation that is happening in these courses. So remembering that we kind of need to make it fun for ourselves and make it meaningful and valuable for ourselves is a really important thing to kind of think about. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and just say thank you to Elizabeth for coming in and being willing to share some of her thoughts about what faculty have been saying about first year seminar. So Elizabeth, I guess the first question I have for you is, do you have any other observations about the statistics or the results that I shared?
No, I think you've covered well. I do think there is that split between logistics and exhaustion. Some of the logistics is misconceptions. Like several people said that you weren't allowed to teach a hybrid, or you couldn't teach it. It must be limitations that are being put on by the department, because Matthew thinks it would be fine to teach on Mondays. And in fact, I know Cindy Gamenbach and a couple other people do teach just Mondays. And there hasn't been an attempt to do a completely online version, but a hybrid version also seems to be fine. So it's not clear where the perceived limitations on scheduling are coming from. So that's something that
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
Paige is going to want to work on with Matthew, that they have first year seminar or not. And I think that also might have to do with seniority, because I'm always able to say, I want to teach 2 first year seminars in the fall. And my department chair doesn't seem to have an issue with scheduling that way. So there's definitely, and I think we found this around the general education. In other ways, there are generally some misconceptions and a failure to communicate some issues about the logistics.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody did comment that they had trouble getting reimbursed. I never had trouble getting reimbursed, but I have had trouble getting guest speakers paid, to the point where I've stopped inviting guest speakers, because it's embarrassed when they don't get paid. Of people power in the departments. Some people in some departments feel like they can't teach it because of other department commitments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that those sound like a lot of important issues. Abby brought up an issue in the chat as well. Just being concerned about who's going to cover my courses. So I also remember from the survey that there were kind of things that you could list. Are they things like what you found challenging and what you found gratifying? I can't remember. There seemed to be some questions that got at those experiences that faculty had from their perspective.
Yeah, in terms of what would you change or what would you keep if we were to make changes. I did have several faculty say that they just needed to take a break because they found first year seminar to be overwhelming because of the contact with the students. And sort of because of goal 3, you're working more closely with students and you tend to perhaps find out more about what's going on for them. And a lot of our students really do have a rough time. But it's interesting because students were listed as both the best thing and the worst thing about teaching this class. That, if you have students who are engaged, and sometimes the room is just magic. I think we've all had that experience of the room's just magic. And other times, and I taught it one spring where I never had more than 4 people in the room, and it was never the same 4 people. It was just, and I was trying to do a group project and I could never put the groups together because I never had a consistent attendance. And so I ended up actually having to shift that project mid-semester. And so that gets back to the whole thing of the flexibility needed. And not all of us are that emotionally or mentally flexible. And so it can be hard sometimes when you're faced with, I need to pivot and I'm not sure how to pivot. So that can be difficult.
100%. Yeah. Thank you. I think hopefully this workshop will provide at least some food for thought around flexibility. Is there anything else, Elizabeth, that you feel like would be useful for the group in terms of how do we sustain ourselves and our capacity to teach this course well and effectively and not get burnt out?
I think it's important to be teaching something that we care about and something that we think the students will care about. And I shared with you earlier, there was a comment about the lack of uniformity of topics and that some topics were considered not rigorous enough and perhaps a waste of students' time. And I think that that really comes down to how it's presented and how deeply one goes into it. At one point, there was somebody in computer science who taught a seminar on knitting, and people were like, oh, they're teaching knitting. But if you think about it and you think about the various knitting traditions, Estonian knitting or Irish knitting, and you really could do some amazing things with that. And so something that on the face of it seems not academic. I mean, tarot cards seems not academic. And yet, if I talk about Jung and archetypes and different artists' interpretations and Persephone and the role she plays and gender roles, I mean, there's that idea that some topics aren't worthy. And yet, I think if we are passionate about our particular topic, that has sustenance.
I love that. I think you articulated that so well. There's something about encouraging students by modeling how to cultivate kind of rigorous inquiry about anything, right? Rigorous inquiry about anything. And if you can do that, then you have begun to really build the college muscle beyond all of these other things that we're thinking about in this course. And I think that it just, the things that folks are doing in here are so interesting, and the courses themselves are so fascinating. I kind of want to take all of them And I think that the courses that are coming out of this institute are really modeling this commitment to inquiry as a process that doesn't, it doesn't need to be stiff. It doesn't need to be boring. It doesn't need to be PhD level, right? In order for it to really make a difference in how students see themselves as learners, in how they orient themselves toward their college education, and how they also orient themselves towards sort of everything that they encounter in the world. So I love that. I love the way you framed it. Thank you so much. Um, but I first want to just kind of hold the space for our reality. We actually don't get paid for working 40 hours a week. We get paid for working 37.5. So if you are assuming a 4-4, right, a four course teaching load, you're in the classroom for 12 hours. You have 10 hours approximately for teaching, prep, and grading for all 4 courses. You have office hours and advising. You have service meetings, email, and then, if community engagement. And then, you have research. Most of us consider research our hobby that we do at other times. But I just want to remind you that you are already working really, really hard, that you are already shifting gears multiple times a day, sometimes multiple times an hour, that you are utilizing skill sets that are diverse, that are complex, that are sometimes incongruous to one another, right? So let's just remind ourselves that this is what we're doing every single day of the semester. And we've all filled out the union survey. And when we try to break it down, we're like probably at 56 hours a week, right? And it's not every week. And some weeks you take it easy, but let's just remind ourselves of the sphere within which we are operating. Within that sphere, these are the things that I just kind of thought about, right? How do we manage our priorities? How do we figure out what matters most to us in our first year seminar and then maintain that focus through the semester? How do we manage time? How do we create space, creating room for the emergent or the, more vernacular, creating wiggle room in your syllabus so that you have the space to work with as things arise? Preventing and handling common problems that come up in the first year seminar and in other classes. Some of this is classroom management, but it's not all classroom management. And then how do you amplify the good? How do you create the team? How do you provide the leadership that kind of invites students to see that what they are doing in their first year seminar matters to them, right? Even though it's not related to their major, even if it's not connected to, the other kind of Gen Ed requirements, how do you constantly bring up the things that are happening that are really positive that then is reflected back to you in the positive energy of your students? So I think managing our priorities is probably a pretty something you think about all the time. It's something you sometimes think about in the breach, right? When you realize that your course isn't going in the way that you kind of wanted it to go and it's not feeling that good to you. So I kind of broke this down into just one major question, which is, what are your priorities, right? Is it your essential question? I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Is it your essential question? Is it community building? Is it inviting students to really kind of feel at home at Salem State? Is it inspiring them with the topic, right? Like, what is it? And you can have more than one, but if you have one that you're like, this is it, this is it for me. Then when things start to get a little clogged or the unexpected occurs, you have this place to fall back on, right? It's your essential question or it's your community building. Elizabeth said, it's really important to teach about something you care about. It's important to teach about something about which you are passionate. And I will sort of annotate that by saying, for some of us, it's important not to be too attached to our topic, right? I had the SADS. For 3 or 4 years, I just had a chronic case of the SADS every time I walked into my first year seminar because these were things I have dedicated myself to. I am passionate about. I am engaged in like discourse with other academics. I read everything that comes up, and here are these kids, and like I couldn't make it make sense to them, and I couldn't make them love it. And they sat there like looking at me like I was a cold turd on the desk, right? And they just didn't know who was going to pick it up and throw it away. So for me, my solution was to prioritize the community building. And the topic actually became a way to prioritize my sort of like learning style or whatever. So I love to learn. I love to learn new things. I am energized and excited when I learn new things. And I'm also deeply humble, right? I know what I don't know. And so I will not get tweaked in weird ways around the topic. So that's why I change my topic all the time, right? That for me is a way to manage my priorities. So can you guys just share in the chat really quickly, like right now in this minute? It doesn't have to stay this way and it doesn't matter. But right now, when you're like, what's your one non-negotiable priority in your first year seminar? What would you say? Just write it in the chat. And John, if you don't want to use the chat, just shout it out.
For me, my priority is writing and self-discovery.
Writing and self-discovering. Students feel safe and supported as they become part of this SSU community. Susie's like such a pro. She's managed to like slide in several, which is what they're all integrated. And I've looked at her syllabus and it is all integrated, which is pretty amazing. Helping students learn skills they need, building community, getting them settled into being at SSU, a sense that they can be successful, how to help students see and think about where they're going. So what do you guys notice about this list of priorities? Kim, what do you notice about this list?
They're all student focused.
Student focused.
Nobody said their topic.
Nobody
Right,
said
right.
Nobody's
Right.
focused on the topic.
So student focused. Anything else, Kim?
Oh, I don't know, Margo. I'm not sure. A lot of people mentioned community.
A lot of community. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. I also see process. It's like really processual, right? These priorities are very, in a lot of ways, really processual. So one thing to think about is, you want to really make time for what matters to you. You want to really make time for this, right? And some things are going to be making time for community building. Some things are going to be making time for field trips, right? Where students can engage with each other in a different kind of setting. You need to make time in your syllabus for the things that really matter to you, right? And I'll give you an example of like how I didn't do this, right? I was like, I think students should learn how to annotate. I think they should learn how to read closely and annotate an article. Did I like explain to them why this mattered? Did I walk them through hypothesis? Did I have a class session that really unpacked our annotations? No, I did not, because that would have been 4 sessions, right? So we like did one, 15-minute overview, and then we all sat in a computer lab somewhere and annotated. And then in the next class, we talked about it for like a minute. But like, if it was really my priority, I wouldn't have done it that way, right? I would have really thought more about why it's important and how to do it. So I think we are so tempted to do it all, right? And to throw everything at the wall and just see what sticks. And I think that what we've all been kind of experiencing throughout this institute that Abby so masterfully put together is that you kind of need to have some focus points, right? You can't necessarily do everything from a pedagogical perspective, but I'm here to tell you, you also can't necessarily do everything from a sustainability perspective, right? And it's not the only time you're going to teach it, hopefully. If you want to change it up the next year, you can. Nobody's going to be in there again, right? And like nobody's really going to pay that much attention. It's not like one of those 100 level classes in your major where if you forget to do something big, then the students are going to be caught out the next semester when they take a 200 level class, right? There are certain ways that we really are constrained in our other courses, and we feel pressure to cover certain kinds of skills and certain kinds of content, right? In this class, we can be liberated from that. And I think that's huge. And then I think that the final thing there is just, grappling with limits, yours and students, right? So an example that I use, and this is being recorded, and I don't know if I'll get in trouble, but if you have a field trip, right? Even if it's like you're all gonna go bowling, but you gotta figure that out. You gotta probably carpool because Salem State's really bad at helping us get places off campus. Students are going somewhere that they may never have been before. They're going to be in a social situation with people that they've never been social before. It's going to be tiring in a lot of different ways. Cancel a class or two, right? It takes you. Oops, I'm frozen. It it takes you a lot of time to organize that, to call the bowling alley, to figure out how much it's going to cost, to get the money, to figure out the cars, right? Or the bus. Like it takes you a lot of time and it takes your students a lot of energy. So don't feel bad for creating space to regroup a little bit, right? So those are just kind of like priorities things that I wanted to mention. Um, I guess what I would love to hear from you just for a second is like, how do you see your focus on priorities shaping the way you're approaching your first year seminar as it's playing out as you develop it or rejig it in this institute?
Can I say something?
Go, Jim.
I years ago, I came upon this sort of skill, personal characteristic called perspective taking, which is really important, that you can take the perspective of another person. So I thought this is something I would focus on in my class. So I had a instrument I got from our beloved psych colleagues on perspective taking. I did it at the beginning. I did it at the end. There was like no movement. And I talked to Joanna Gatsalfis. I said, Joanna, it's like I couldn't move these kids at all. She said, oh, yeah, that takes years. And I realized, she said, oh, maybe self-efficacy, however you say it. There's a few that maybe you might move them, but actually one class does very little. And in a way that was liberating to me. And it's really transformed my way of thinking, because to graduate from Salem State, you need 40 classes, and you can see our, students at, when they're graduating, most of them really have matured and learned and whatever, but the studies show that you just don't move kids along very much in one class, whether it's a skill or a characteristic or something. The other thing that's really depressing, I've read these repeatedly, these studies where, by the time a student walks out of class, they've forgotten, half of what was presented in the class. And then like by the end of the week, they've lost 80% or whatever. And this idea that somehow we're getting them to do this stuff and they're going to learn this content and these skills. And I was like, it's a long, slow process. And we're little piece in this larger 4 to 6 year program. And, we try our best, but, we can't get hung up that we have to teach them X and they have to get Y. Anyway, okay, that's my little spiel, but that's really transformed my approach to teaching.
I think that's huge. I think that's really important, sort of remembering how incremental it is. What are some other things that have transformed your teaching? Like, what are some other sort of nuggets or information that's come in, or just through your experience where you feel like, oh, this has really transformed how I approach my teaching?
Sometimes you have to unpack your own assumptions and you have to like stop and think. So I suggest that students they have to buy a tarot deck, and I tell them they can buy whatever tarot deck they want. And Pyramid Books in downtown Salem will give them 10% off. And so I suggest that they go to Pyramid Books. And there is a person at Pyramid Books who's constantly telling my students that because they're beginners, they must buy the Smith Rider-Waite tarot. That's the original tarot. They must buy the Smith Rider-Waite tarot. And when I first started hearing that, I was like, no, you don't have to buy that, because I don't really like that deck. But then I dove deeper and realized that part of what I want them to do is to engage with the artwork in the tarot deck. And so I started talking more about the artwork and about artist choice and, the fact that there are archetypes and that there are certain symbols that show up over and over again, but then there are other symbols that might show up in a different deck of the same card. And so that tension with an unknown salesperson at Pyramid Books who kept insisting that they buy this deck led to me really going in and unpacking what it was about wanting them to pick the deck that they've responded to visually, and then changing some of my assignments to really focus more on how do you respond to this artwork? And to talk more about the fact that as human beings, we respond to artwork. And so it was just a whole, and I've been doing the same topic. Unlike you, I don't change topics because I find that I'm pulled deeper and deeper into this every time. And so I think about changing and then I'm like, nah. But this whole focus on art is so far out of, I study the Polish military. It's so far out of what I do academically, but I love it.
Yeah, it's so clear. I love your love for it. And I love that example. I think that's perfect. Amanda, go ahead.
One thing that I've really come to realize, and actually going to the Sodal workshop last week was part of this, with my background being in nursing and having taught in nursing for several years and then now teaching in healthcare studies, that's actually been incredibly freeing in the sense that I've realized I don't have to be so regimented and prescriptive. In nursing, you must be. These are the things that you must master and you must know, A, because you're going to do it to a real person. So you've got to know what you're doing. And B, because there's an extremely high stakes licensure exam. So the responsibility lies with me to make sure you know these things. Whereas in healthcare studies, there's much more, particularly in the first year, there's nothing in particular that you have to know. It's very, very much more on me to kind of decide and think, well, the class really seems to feel like they want to do this, and that's okay. Whereas if it was like, oh, nope, we're doing this, that's it. But that's not the case now. And that's actually been very liberating. I'm kind of still wrestling with this new realization that I had.
Yeah. Yeah, that's transformative. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Abby, go ahead, and then John. You're muted. Huh?
Yeah. It's not my teaching necessarily, but as we were starting talking, Margo, I was thinking about FYS and about vicarious trauma, which is the trauma that caretakers can get from being exposed to other people's traumas. As far as I understand, I'm not an expert in it at all. And I have some slides that I'll share from Lori Dixine Fisher's presentation that she did earlier this year, like in January, about self-care and compassion and like burnout prevention, which I think is like especially important for FYS because you may be like exposed to, it sounds like a fair amount of what you're exposed to is disorganization and stress and drama of first year students, but there also might be some trauma, right? And so just being aware of that. But one of the things that she focused on, and Jim, I don't know if this came out of conversations with you. I got to talk with Jim for a while and interview him, and so I got to learn about a happy life a little bit. So I feel very lucky. But one of the questions was about the pleasure you derive from your work as a way to abate and push back on burnout, and asking about, how is your work meaningful to you? And how do you show yourself self-compassion? But I think like asking that question of like, yeah, it's okay to prioritize the things that feel meaningful and important to me. It's okay to make that one of my ways of assessing what's important as a way to help myself stay energized for the long haul in this. I thought that was my takeaway. But I'll put the slides in the chat, even though I know that if maybe just open them for later because there's a lot to unpack in there and I don't want to distract everyone from this awesome conversation.
Thanks, Abby. John, go ahead.
So the transformative event in my teaching actually came a long time ago. My colleague here at Bunker Hill, Rob Whitman, and I were walking together after class from one building to another. And he was in this classroom and I was in the next classroom, and we're friends. And I asked him, and he's quite a bit older than me. Actually, not that much older. But anyway, I asked him, what do I do to prevent myself from getting jaded? And he just said, stop using the textbook. And so that night, we were using the Concise Guide to Writing. And so that night or weekend, I rewrote the syllabus and I gave that was a Thursday class. And then on Tuesday next, I gave the kids the new syllabus and said, this is what we're doing now. And I haven't looked back. And I do my own thing and nobody looks over my shoulder. And my classes, and I primarily teach first year writing, they keep getting better. Every semester they get better. And the reason why I want to do the seminars, and I'm so excited about it, is that I sense that there's a great amount of freedom and space for my creativity. And I am more, I invent stuff on the spot.
Yeah.
And that's what gives me the most energy.
Yes. And you deserve that. We deserve that.
Yeah, I can't teach to a textbook or from a
Right.
textbook.
And if that's what sustains your joy and your curiosity and your learning, then you are bringing that into the classroom every single time that class meets.
Yeah, and
I think that is.
It happened this morning right here in this classroom with 10 Bunker Hill students that I'd never met before. And it's just fucking great.
Yay. Thank you all so much for sharing that. For me, the hardest thing about teaching in general, but definitely about teaching first year seminar, is managing time. And so this is like, sorry, I still said the wrong thing, but I mean, this is really basic and I fucked up. Sorry. Okay. Managing time, right? So these are the things that I consider to be the most important. The one is respect their time and yours, right? Try not to clog your syllabus with tons and tons of assignments and tons of discussion posts and tons of short readings. Like really sit with yourself and figure out what matters. Every single person here has the skill and the talent for pulling a lot out of a little. And this is something Elizabeth brought up at my very first year seminar institute in like 2014, right? Like a little goes a long way. A little goes a long way. So respecting their time and yours in the course design, but also respecting their time and yours in terms of really articulating and amplifying why you are doing things and why it matters, right? Because at some point around the middle of the semester, they start to feel like maybe this is busy work. They start to feel like maybe this is pulling them away from other things. In the first few weeks, they are yours. And those first 2 weeks, I would say, are going to shape the vibes as they go forward in the seminar. So really showing them and telling them, right? You can't tell them too much that you respect them. You can't tell them too much that you respect their time, right? You are teaching them to see themselves as adults, and you are making it visible and transparent why what you're doing in this class matters. Front loading and considering other courses in your course planning. Don't have a big class project in your first year seminar when you have 40 lab reports coming in or 30 8-page papers, right? And don't have a lot due in your first year seminar when you have drafts coming in that you know that you have to give feedback on in a really timely manner in order for students to then do the next draft. I really recommend front loading your first year seminar. Nobody's doing a lot in their first few weeks in most of their classes. They start to get the idea college is a coast. By the time their first midterms come along, they're just like, whoa. And by the time the finals come along, the stakes feel very high, and they can also bring resentment towards their first year seminar into the classroom with them because they do feel like it's taking them away from other stuff. So if you can front load, if you can have really the major stuff done by Thanksgiving, if you can build your schedule so that you feel sane and that you are not overloading yourself by not paying attention to what's coming in your other classes, the time management will largely, I think, take care of itself. Sometimes we feel super responsible for what happens in our classroom. We want to develop pre-questions and post-questions and reflections for every single guest speaker. I'm really encouraging you to allow guest speakers and facilitators to do their jobs and to use that as an opportunity for you to draw your attention towards something else. It might be drawing your attention towards some classroom management issues. It might be drawing your attention towards some kids who seem to really need some extra support and you want to connect them with resources. But let your guest speakers and facilitators do what they've come to do, and do not feel like you need to micromanagement in order to prove that you're doing your job. You are doing your job. And then finally, if it's really important, do it in class. If it really matters, if you really feel like this is a contingent thing, it's a pivotal thing, if it doesn't get done correctly or with some intentionality, then it's going to mess up things going forward in the course. Make time to do it in the class. It's really easy when you're designing your course to be like, okay, this can be an assignment. This can be a discussion. We can like break into small groups or whatever. I really think that using class time intentionally to focus on the things that matter is worth it, even if it means that you may not be able to cover as much as you wanted to cover. This is something, oh, Elizabeth, go ahead.
I have a corollary to that, which, and I posted a link to the document in the discussion from yesterday, but I think has a work called Creating Significant Learning. He says is that if you are asking students to work in groups, you must give them time in class to do that group work. Do not expect students to coordinate with each other outside of class. And that's one of those, if it's important, do it in class. You have to figure out how to
Yeah.
give them time in class to work with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Abby and I had talked about this idea of how you create space in your syllabus. So some people call it creating space for the emergent. I tend to think of it as wiggle room. I just want to remind you all that unstructured time is required, I think, to really build community, and an environment that invites a little bit of a sense of ease. Maybe not every day, right? But if there's a sense of ease some days, then other days when you're like, we really we gotta nail down and get her done, they're going to be with you, right? They're going to come along for that. So I just want to remind you about why we create space in our syllabus. Also, I don't think people are going to complain about downtime in your first year seminar as long as every class does not feel like downtime. There's a typo in my slide. Please forgive me. Every class should not feel like downtime. So how do you create space? Right. So John just gave us an example of how he was confronting the possibility of burnout and being jaded. And so he went home and rewrote a syllabus. That's fine, right? Have a really clear plan. Have an articulated statement in your syllabus about what's going to happen if your syllabus needs to change. Are you going to load a new syllabus into Canvas? Are you going to update a syllabus that's sort of written in text form in Canvas? Are you going to hand out a new hard copy? What are you going to do? Right? Students really like to know where they're headed, and they do not, none of us enjoy feeling like we're not in good hands. Right? So honor the fact that you might need some flexibility and develop a plan. Right? This is what's going to happen. I learned from the pandemic that if my syllabus changes, the first thing I do is update the syllabus and upload it. The second thing I do is create a video, right? And I make that video an assignment. And I make a little video of me saying, this is what changed, this is why it changed, this is what you can look for, right? And all they have to do is say, got it, or whatever. But I just need to make sure that they saw it. Consider creating a category in your syllabus that is like random, right? Evolving thoughts, evolving questions, issues for now, and put it in several times, right? At least that way you have room in your syllabus for things coming up. Those might not adhere to the date that they're on, but what they do is they help you avoid the situation where all of a sudden you're like, well, we can do 2 of these things in one class session, or, I can push that off. Like, it just gives you room. And the same thing with, adding a few things right from the beginning that you think are not the biggest priorities that you can actually cancel, right? So that way, when a student gets shot a mile from campus, or there's a massive traumatic event, or there's just something going on in the dorms where the kids didn't sleep the night before, right? They were out for a fire drill for 2.5 hours in the middle of the night. You don't have to totally spend all your time and energy figuring out how to revamp your syllabus. You have already made a little bit of space in your syllabus for the emergent.
Got it. So in other words, don't plan every single second of the semester from the start.
I think that, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the simplest way to say it.
I'm good at that.
This is how do you address problems? And this kind of comes back to Abby's point as well about trauma. So the vibes matter. We all have different ways of addressing the vibes, but the vibes matter. I apologize that I can't see the chat when I'm sharing my slide. So that's something for us to maybe think about. Underscoring that it's we, not me and you, I think is a really effective kind of tool, discursive tool in first year seminar. Figuring out what you can ignore and what you can't, and using navigate. What I mean by figure out what you can ignore and what you can't, I think a lot of these issues have to do with your students, and the more that you're engaging with them, the more that student kind of issues might come up. So one example that I wanted to sort of talk through, but of course, I always overplan. That's my kryptonite. So two students are dating in your first year seminar, and then clearly something goes wrong. They used to sit together essentially in each other's laps. They're giggling, they're like hanging out. If one doesn't come, the other one doesn't come, right? And then all of a sudden, like you come in and one's in the far back corner and the other one's in the far front corner. Do you need to deal with that? Are they coming to class? Are they disruptive? No, you don't need to deal with it. But if you have two students in your first year seminar, and I'm not making this up, they were a couple, something happened, one has a restraining order against the other. Yeah, that's real. It happened to me. Then you can't ignore that, right? And you probably can't sort of just put it on navigate. That's where you got to go to the dean of students, right? Or the associate dean of students, right? That's where you got to take care of things. It's the same thing, like a student is, they're having problems at home, mom's going through chemo. You can talk with them on an individual basis, right, about how to make sure that they don't get too far behind. You've already thought about creating a little bit of flexibility in your grading structure, in your attendance structure, right? Those are things that aren't that big a deal. But if a student their family's home has gone up in flames, and they don't have any resources to really deal with that. They've lost all their clothes, they've lost their computer, their parents have, things are in chaos. That's above your pay grade, right? But you still need to deal with it, because a lot of times students, some of us are part-time instructors, a lot of us are full-time instructors, some of us are staff at the institution. We may very well be the one person who's an adult, right, that this student feels comfortable with, right? And so it is going to be on you because there's nobody else, right? You can't tell Matthew to do it because he's already doing 900,000 other things. So that is what I mean by kind of assessing what you can ignore and what you can't ignore, right? The theater kids who are like, I'm so tired because we had theater last night, ignore it. Who cares, right? That's them. They're going to figure it out. It's fine. The kid who doesn't speak a lot, you can figure that out. You can encourage them. You can send them an email. I really loved how you were nodding along, right? I really appreciated how well you were paying attention today. You can figure those things out. You don't have to take on everything. Does that make sense? I hope this is helpful. I mean, it's all things that but sometimes it's just nice to hear a peer and a colleague say it. And I know that Abby wanted to share some housekeeping, and so I wanted to leave a little bit of time for that. Abby, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Thank
unless you want to say something about this first.
Well, I had a question which was just about, I wanted to ask or say something about Navigate, or Navigate 360 as it's called now. And one thing I know is that we kind of hear from the folks who run Navigate 360 is that there are students who fail courses who never have gotten a Navigate alert. And so I think it's I've also heard faculty say I put in Navigate alerts and it didn't really seem to make a dent in the issue. And so somewhere between those two, I think, is the middle ground of maybe Navigate 360, and maybe raise your hand or something if you don't know what that is or you're not familiar with it. But yeah, John, it's our student success system. And so once you put in an alert, it connects to a network of different sort of student success offices who will assess it and then reach out to the student, and they'll, send an email or a text message, which some students will respond to and other ones won't, but they'll try to connect them to the resources. So if they're I need tutoring, they'll try to connect them to that. If they're an athlete and they are failing their course, they might have their coach reach out to them or something like that. So it's set up to be comprehensive. It's not foolproof, but I guess I would just I would put in a plug that it's it's a great starting place. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
if a student is having
I've
trouble.
been here a few years now and I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. I think that navigate is really important, especially if your students are not showing up.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Because that's the sort of first line of defense. I think the progress reports that Sam sends out is also another opportunity for you to actually write kind of, this is what's going on with this student. You can add a little bit more, like they were really engaged for the first month and then something happened, or they seem to think that coming to class is all they need to do. They still think it's high school, so they come to class every day, but they haven't actually handed anything in. Right. Like, so I tend to use the navigate for like, I'm really worried about this kid. But I tend to use the progress reports to be like, there's this is a retention issue because I know that retention kind of makes the wheels turn a little bit at our institution. Amanda, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you use those, I often will read the notes saying, is this student just being weird in my class? Like, so I was like, oh, no, this is going on in every class. Or for my advising, say, I do everything, everything's fine. You're like, well, your faculty say otherwise. So there's a lot of helpful information I find in those systems
In
to give you
navigate,
like a
yeah.
background of what's going on.
Caring concern, Kim brought up caring concern is really, really helpful, and can be useful. I'd pulled some sort of trauma examples from my own experience. A kid who hasn't come to class and then she's falling asleep when she does come, and it turns out she's being bullied, right? And she doesn't feel safe. Like, that's a caring concern issue, right? Especially if it's kind of getting out of hand. Yeah, the other one that I had put as an example is like you have 6 members of the soccer team in your class, and they're not coming to class because they have away games. Like it's a big chunk of your class, and they're like it's hard to move forward as a class because 1/3 of the class isn't actually kind of coming, and they're all friends, and they create a kind of block in your class. Those are just some examples of problems. But it is 1:29, and so I want to make sure that Abby has time to talk about the things that were important for housekeeping purposes.
Yeah, so thank you for passing that mic back as we're about to end up our time. So I would just say, usually around this time, people are asking of a summer program, people are asking me like, wait, what am I supposed to do and when am I supposed to do it? So I just wanted to go over that quickly. So I have set up in Canvas due dates for our final projects a week. This is our last week, week 5. And I put into the chat some of the other Zoom workshop that's coming up this week. But I have all of our due dates one more week out. So I have here that by July 27th, you should plan to submit on Canvas a draft syllabus and reflective note. And I'll send out an email with links to these assignments. And then also screenshots you should start building out your Canvas course, and you can do that in the sandbox that Gail created for you. Or you can transfer that over into your official course, and I can walk you through. I can walk anyone through how to do that, or if you're running into technical difficulties, I'm happy to do like an email or quick one-on-one meeting. And then the other thing that I want to just stress is that we have an end of institute survey that mirrors the one that you did at the beginning. And so I want to just ask that everybody put that on their to-do list also, because that's going to really help us understand the impact of this work that you've done and make a case for future funding for it and that kind of thing. I have here that August 15th is the extended due date. So if something comes up and you're not able to totally finish, submit final projects by this day to get I like to send people a certificate of completion. That's just a letter that you can put into your file and use for whatever you need it to. And then also building towards that work on the Canvas materials is that this Thursday, we're gonna have a Zoom workshop where we're gonna just mostly like do a little walkthrough, answer questions, and then give people time to build, and then, you know, I'll be there to support and ask questions. So it's basically like kind of co-working time. So, and then first day of teaching is September 3rd, which is maybe a rude thing to talk about in the middle of July, but there it is.
That's very rude.
So, and any other questions?
Is
About this?
is the Thursday thing at 1 o'clock on Zoom?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll be there.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go
So in Canvas for this week, it says like time estimates, time will vary. It's like, I'm like, yeah, you got this. And I see finishing a draft syllabus and beginning your Canvas build 60 to 120 minutes. I was like, this week alone, I've already spent like double or triple that on just the syllabus. And just to even get something that was legible for people to share it back to week 4 was like, took me like another 45 minutes just to take out all the stuff I had that was, you'd be like, what is this guy? He's all over the fucking place. What's he doing? So I'm like, did I miss something, or is it, are you guys completing a 120 minutes? You're like, ah, check it out. It's my syllabus.
I mean, we tried to build in, we try to estimate time on task in terms of like payment and stipend. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
just a ballpark. And, you know, also sort of the idea that, you know, people have been working on it an hour or so every week for the last 5 weeks. So if that hasn't worked out for some, you might end up putting more time into it now at the end instead of stretched
Yeah,
out. But
it's the
I don't,
tools
maybe,
too.
but also that's a good piece of feedback.
Yeah, I was like, ooh, and there's a lot of cool tools that you've shared and a lot of things, and it's inspired me to add things and like move stuff around that I normally don't have, but it adds so much time and learning into those aspects because I'm like, okay, how do I integrate this and know that I'm using the good stuff, etc.
Good point. Well, I just want to say thank you. Thanks for your time and your attention and energy and your contributions, especially. I feel like the more I listen and talk with colleagues, the better I feel about teaching. So thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to Abby for organizing this and dealing with it. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the Institute and a great rest of your summer. It's not over yet, even though I keep telling my husband it's over.